Welcome to Bring It Home, where we use the concept of Homeland Security and national security and try to bring those concepts home to you. And today we're going to talk about the question of what is war? What's the nature of war? Many people start their study of war purely with the definition. And let me begin by telling you I'm very much in the favor of peace studies. I don't think you can have peace in the long term unless you study what conditions bring it about. But neither can you have peace unless you understand the nature of war and why it takes place. And so that's what we're going to do today, and primarily from a Clausewitzian perspective. A lot of people have begun their study by asking the definition. And the truth is there is no single definition for war, but scholars have largely accepted that war is defined by some combination of these concepts. It has to be sustained combat. It's not just an exchange of blows or attacks. There must be some threshold of casualties. 3 or 4 people killed is a tragedy, but it isn't considered a war. Many scholars use as a threshold 1,000 casualties. How about formal hostilities? Is there a declaration of war? If not, maybe it's not war, actually it's just crime. Are you using threat or the threat of force or force itself? That's why many scholars today and many politicians don't consider what happens in cyber attacks to be war. How about the interaction of the participants? If one side attacks but the other side doesn't resist, that has happened, maybe that's not a war. Or the legal status of the participants. Was the South in the American Civil War actually a country? If not, then it was a civil war and not actually a war. You see the difference? Probably the best definition I've ever seen of war was offered at the National Defense University several years ago, where I saw this definition: war as the sustained use of armed forces between national organized groups within a nation. It could be regular or irregular forces, a series of connected battles and campaigns for vital national objectives. Not a bad definition. The problem is the definition itself doesn't tell us enough about how to wage it and how to win it. Clausewitz has suggested to us that war is very complex and not at all simplistic in nature. Clausewitz, of course, the great theorist of war. He was on the losing side through much of the wars of the Napoleonic age, sat down as the commandant of a war college in what at the time was Prussia or became Germany, and tried to think through the experiences he has had and came to these conclusions. Now, his methods of reasoning make reading Clausewitz very difficult. He will advance a thesis, and here was his concept. War is nothing but a duel on a larger scale. It's just like people fighting. And opposed to that, he said, I've experienced that's not true. In fact, maybe it's the continuation of policy. Maybe war is just policy between countries. And then he said, but that's not true either. It involves violence and bloodshed. So he found in between those a synthesis, a combination of the two, and what he called a remarkable trinity. He said war is a trinity, three parts of primordial violence, and that's where the hatred and the enmity and bloodlust and what happens when one side is killed, and chance. That's the issue of probability and the creative spirit that overcomes chance, because you can't tell what your enemy is going to do next. And finally, an instrument of policy. There is some reason, some rationality behind war. So he suggests it's these three things. And the problem is finding the balance between reason, passion, and chance. Now, the way many people have studied wars, taught war, and tried to practice war is to say it's just reason. If I put in 1 battalion's worth of effort, I get 1 battalion's worth of outcome. If I put in 2 divisions worth of effort, I get 2 divisions worth of outcome. They've tried to approach war on a very rational basis. But Clausewitz's suggestion was that war is actually not just force. It's not just passion. It's not just chance. Instead, he says it's as if it were balanced, a magnet being balanced between those three. Now, here's 3 different magnets in the base here. Here's a magnet on the top. And when you release it, what you find is it's impossible to predict the trajectory, the direction that this is going to go. This is his suggestion about war. You can do the best you can with reason and training and so forth. But the truth is, there are going to be things you just hadn't anticipated because it's a constantly changing balance. So hence his suggestion that war is very, very complex. Violence is certainly involved. He says if there's no violence, if there's no bloodshed, you're kidding yourself to think it's a war. That's why a war on poverty or a war on illiteracy is never, or a war on drugs, is never really a war because there isn't any real violence involved. Secondly, he says it's not just logic. You can't just win by superior logic. And lastly, it's not just passion. It's not just blind hatred. It is, he says, a synthesis of these 3 things. This makes war complex and vital. It is a life and death issue for every nation, and very, very difficult to win, to wage. It requires all the elements of national power. That's international relations, domestic governance, and domestic leadership. In order to win it, you have to combine diplomacy and economics, as well as military force and even intelligence, and the way you talk to and convince your own people. All these pieces come together in order to wage war. It's this synthesis, this bringing together of international and domestic elements, which makes war a link between national security and homeland security. Many people have talked about homeland security as though it were purely a matter of defending against storms or purely a matter of protecting lives. It's not. It's a matter of protecting the state and the legitimacy of the state. We hope you'll understand this lesson, find it interesting, and so come back and learn more on Bring It Home.